Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about domain-driven design. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Fredrik, do people use domain-driven design in the industry? And the short answer is absolutely. I would say that it is standard practice for most large-scale corporate level code bases, especially in Java and C#, and even the people who don't even know what domain-driven design is all about are very often using some variant of it unknowingly, which I think is kind of fun. So let me just walk you through this, right? So domain-driven design is a concept that in essence is just a set of teachings as to how you should organize your code so that it has a common language with your domain. Let me explain. I know that sounds very technical, but it's actually very simple. So when you and we talk about a system, usually we will find a common language of expressing different parts of a system. Now, what we usually do is that we will say something like, all right, so we're going to have a user, right? And they're going to go to a store or web page of some sort, and they're going to be able to create a purchase cart or some shopping cart, right? And then we're going to allow them to put some product into that. And then once that's been done, they can go to the checkout page, and then they can purchase place an order basically with these different products, and then we're going to ship that to them, and then we send them like an email or something like that, and then they can give us some feedback with some comments or something like that. Now, I just described the basics of a web shop for you, and I did so using this common language, these nouns and verbs, or these descriptions of different parts of the systems and different actions that a user can take within that system. So what did I say? I said you have a user. Now that's a model for sure. That's a model. And then you have some type of shopping page or something like that. Now that's a part of the system for sure. And then you could purchase things. You could place something. You have a cart of some sort, and you could put a product in that cart. So basically, I'm describing three things there. I'm describing the cart, I'm describing the product, and the fact that a cart can take a product, that you can place a product inside of that shopping cart. And then we were talking about going to the checkout page so that you can buy something. That's also an action, something that can happen within the system. And then we have the email, that I dispatch an email, or like after I placed an order. So you can place an order, you have an order model, and so forth. And then finally you get an email of some sort confirming your purchase, and then you can place some comments. So you can get an email, which is an action, and an email is actually a model as well. And then you can give some feedback, which is an action. And finally you can place a comment, which is also just an action with an associated model. So that is what domain-driven design is all about. And the funny part about this is that most people actually do this very naturally, even if they haven't read domain-driven design or they don't actually know how this works. And we do this because it's so natural for us humans to express these different entities through just our normal conversations. So I don't know how many, pretty much every developer will create a model, regardless of if they're self-taught or they're like a beginner, or if they worked for years but never actually studied domain-driven design. They will create a model like a user, because it's very natural that you need to create an entity that holds the information of something that is associated with a user. So you create the user. Same thing for the shopping cart or the product. That's also a very natural thing to create, right? Or a order. And most people will actually discover this. Now, the difference between someone who has, in my opinion at least, studied domain-driven design and knows the actual, the more intricate features, because there's this is the simple part, just the naming and the nouns and having these common names for the different entities. This kind of just comes naturally. But the fork happens later on when we're going to talk about where we put our action logic, the things that we were saying that can happen within the system, like placing a product into a cart, or sending an email, or sending a comment, or like placing a comment, these sorts of things, right? This feature logic, or the action logic, that is where you will very clearly start to see if someone has kind of embraced domain-driven design, if they haven't. Because usually what I see is that people who don't really know so much about domain-driven design, and they haven't really studied these sorts of architectural practices, they will quite often either not have a clear architecture for how they just have different utility functions all over the place, or, which is also, I would say, even more common, is that they put all of these different actions, this action logic, on their models. Now, for quite a lot of people, this, depending on the complexity of the system, this isn't really much of a problem. I mean, it doesn't really matter if a user knows how to, place a order inside of a cart, or maybe send out if a user model has the logic for sending out an email to that user saying that the purchase has been confirmed. Now, the problem with this is that this doesn't scale all that well from most of the time, because especially for a model such as the user, it has a tendency to become this bucket for pretty much all logic, and all of a sudden you find it very hard to actually instantiate a instance of a user, because a user is the sort of entity that is used across the entire system. And in theory, depending on how you formulate yourself or how you think about it, a user could pretty much do almost everything in the system. But you could also, as an example, you could have moved the action logic or the feature logic of placing an order, a product into the cart, to the cart model or to the product model, if that makes sense, right? So it's about where you put that logic, right? And when people don't have a good understanding of clean and good architecture, it very often becomes the case that a model that is very connected to the code base, or has a very tight coupling to almost everything, like the user, becomes what we call a God class. And a God class is just one class that can do everything, or that has basically too much going on. We're breaking one of the principles of good programming practices, which is the single responsibility principle, that you have a user class that can do pretty much everything in the entire system. So what I want you to take away from this is that domain-driven design is definitely used by pretty much everybody in the industry, because the first layer, like the simple, like the first part of domain-driven design, is so natural to so many people that it happens even if you don't know what it is about, where we name things such as entities and actions and things that can have to express the domain that we are working in, right? The thing that may not come so natural is the next step, where to group your action logic and how to separate concerns and that sort of thing, where we go a little bit deeper into the architectural aspects of domain-driven design. So people who don't study domain-driven design usually they can often end up in a situation where they create a lot of unnecessary complexity or God classes or stuff of this nature, because they don't really have a clear picture of where all of this is supposed to go. That's just what I've seen, but for the most part, you can expect domain-driven design to exist at least the higher levels, the corporate level development companies out there, and especially if you're working in Java and C#. Have a great day.